Thank you. I want to join that party. Everybody's having a wine, so you guys are missing out listening to me. Anyway, how was the dinner? How was the taco? How was the tomato soup? And you guys had dinner already without me?
Yes, it was delicious.
Okay. I don't know what we're going to have in the nighttime, if it was dinner now. This is what I was trying to wake you up. We had lunch. So anyway, thank you for giving me an opportunity to talk to here about cyber industrial risk landscape. I'm not going to bore you to that, what OT, ICS, IoT, medical IoT, and all those things means. But let's see what happens in next couple of slides. And I'm going to go back to show you the history of last 200 years of evolution that happened with Industrial 1.0 to 2.0 to 3.0, and now what we are calling Industrial 4.0 evolution, and why we are here. Many of the cybersecurity companies talked about ransomware, threat agents, nation state, how it all came about. I think hopefully I can do the justice to my previous speaker, Jordan. He was an excellent in his delivery, so bear with me if I don't, but if not, then, like I said, we have a wine right in the back. Thank you to Jamim and those team. So it's not me, we're gonna get to the wine pretty soon, so. All right, what happens in an internet minute? So I'm not gonna talk through this, I'm just gonna let slide the video and see if you guys can connect to the video, and we're gonna talk through after that. Quick question. What happened after 2015 on the slide?
Everything blew up.
Everything blew up. So I hope people watched the video because there was quite a few nice, cool things. Everybody, including me, my wife, my kids, your family, were part of those generation creating the data. When the Facebook launched, when the Google.com came, I still remember distinctly when I was back in Intel, there were quite a few folks back in 99, 2005, 2006, we're trying to go to a company called Google. And back then I was thinking, even if you go to google.com, it's a singular search spotlight bar. And like, they don't have a product. And I'm from Intel, or I was from Intel, having a product guy. Hardware guy, I said, I can't go for work for the company. And look at where we are today with all the digital transformation and the digitization of the data. What I want to talk about is I'm going to go back to the history and to show you what it all meant, why all this company represent what they do today, but how it happened. And some of those might be boring, but I'm going to come back to the topic as to why we are here and what is the discussion of this industrial revolution and the cyber landscape. Many of my previous speakers have already talked about the threat intelligence and the SecOps and ransomware as a service and the new waveform of threat agents that's coming out of the woodwork, including the nation state and how they're going to do about it. And where it all started is, let's go back to in the beginning, about 200 years ago. I don't know if anybody know, but in 1750, Ben Franklin proved that static electricity and lightning were the same. Now, why I'm going to the history lessons, we are all been to the history class in our, back in the early elementary and the middle school, but the context matters. Fast forward a couple of years later, first electricity battery got introduced. Now, why all this matters, in my second slide, I'll probably go through this. So as you can see, this is going from a mechanical introduction to the invention of those electricity. Faraday invented a first electric motor. So we went from understanding of the lights, understanding of the electricity, understanding and creating of the electric motor, which is another mechanical device. Fast forward, in 1835, the electrical relay invented. Do you know why that was important? What was so important about the relay back in the days, in 200 years ago, which is how AT&T, Bell, and the radio frequency and how they transported the radio frequency, the telephone calls. And this is why this invention matters. At that time, the invention that was created for the better good of the public and the society and the social norm. But now we are living in the day and age where that turns into something what we call as a digital transformation. People take this as a very positive way. At the same time, it is a very disruptive technology. Now, disruptive as a word doesn't mean it's a bad or it's a negative. It comes with its territory, however you like it. So go back to the history, like when telegraph was invented, the first light bulb that Thomas Edison invented. Fast forward right around 1900, the first DC power station was invented, and Edison invented a light bulb. Now, look at the timings, 1879 to 1882, we had both AC and DC invention already created. How long it took for a Tesla Motors to create a car that runs on that invention riding on a road. What I'm trying to tell you is every invention had a history that resonated with what we do in the future. Fast forward, back in the days when the DC power or the Edison, when the electricity was created, I don't know how many of you watch. I'll highly recommend, if you guys go watch, it's probably on Amazon Prime, The Man Who Built America. I don't know if anybody watched. I highly recommend you guys go watch it and you'll realize all this invention that came about. And even though it says the man who built America, it's not just about America, but it's how those inventions created, and it reflects on our society moving forward. And I still recall that one of the episodes where J.P. Morgan or Thomas Edison, who pretty much J.P. Morgan Chase, what we call it today, he wanted to promote a DC motor from Tesla invention. And Thomas Edison and Tesla, I don't know if anybody knew, they were working in the same company. In fact, Tesla was a subordinate of Thomas Edison in his own form company. But he was trying to form up with the DC invention, so it didn't go well, and he created his own company, which is now what we call it Tesla, but back in the days. Since then, the invention, it was so critical in those days because that time, electricity was not pervasive. Not everybody could afford an electricity. And if you go further down before that, this is why the heavy reliance on the oil and the gas, kerosene. Till back in the days, there was no electricity, so people used to light through the kerosene. Now, why all this matters? Why I'm bringing you go back to the 1750 to all the way up to 1920s, where finally we could see the house wired are connected with the technology, with the lights and the powers and the utilities and the energies. This is what we call industrial 1.0 and 2.0 revolution. People, you'll see in a slide, people talk about it, but when I ask the questions, okay, what did it mean to me as a layman term? Think about, I'm not a technology officer, but I'm just a computer guy, or I'm a mechanical engineer, or I'm students. What does it mean when we talk about industrial revolution? But when you talk through this, they realize, oh, Now I know what you mean. Electricity was invented, somebody invented something, now turned into an industry. If the internet were a movie, we would still be in the opening credits. Now, why I would say this, let's say, I know we are not running a movie here, but think about it in a digital world of all our revolution, the rate of the change will approach a light speed. Now, why is that? So let's go back to second wave of industrial 3.0 and 4.0 inventions. We talked about mechanical, we talked about electrical. We're moving into the convergence of mechanical and electrical into the automations. And now we're moving into the digitization of the world, where in 1951, the first computer, Ferranti Mark, was invented. Commercial computer. There was nothing sort of personal computer existed. In 59, first electronic integrated circuit prototype was created by Norby and Colby. Fast forward, early 1970, we had ARPANET. My previous colleague talked about the ARPANET, information about how the college and the universities started this communications. Now, what we call is the first wave of a generation of the internet. From 1971 to 1983, it took IBM to invent the first computer laptop for a personal use. Whereas if you go back 25 years ago, the actual commercial computer was on the market. So every transition to the digitization takes time, but when it does, it goes to the rate of light speed. If I go fast forward, in 1991 again, the Tim Berners was published the first World Wide Web. Now what we call it www, or you do it google.com, Yahoo, doesn't matter. But if without that information, think about where we would have been in the digital world. Again, 1997, a critical change of the convergence started happening. Google formed, and it changed the entire industry in the terms of search. What is a color that I would like to wear? What is my wrist size? What is my shoe size? You can find freaking everything on Google, and it knows the answer. Now, if it is right or wrong, that's a different discussion. Fast forward, in 1997 to 2003, there was a first Wi-Fi, Intel Centrino connectivity, that letting us go from all those wide connections now that we are seeing. Now you can think about this, that back in those days, back in 2003, 2004, there was not such a word called IoT. Everybody talks about IoT as of today. Now, when we talk about this sort of a revolution, I said in the beginning, if the internet were a movie, we would still be in an opening credits. Why? Because if you look at the trajectory of the data starting from 2003 to all the way up to 2012, I'm going to say why I stop at 2012. I could have gone easily up to 2021. But if you look at the trajectory of the way the data is moving, or what we call it as a data as a new oil in the current marketplace, Facebook was launched in 2004. 2007, the first iPhone launch. Can you believe that? From all the mechanical device or the query device that we had from BlackBerry and the Nokia. And look at it, and I'm sure 90% of them have Samsung and an iPhone. Another 3 years later, Apple wasn't stopping and then said, you know what, I'm going to replace the laptop. Or they try to, and they come up with that iPad concepts or the tablet. How many of you have a tablet at home, besides being a primary computer? So 2012, and this is where I generally stop in one of those slides because it resonates what happened within the overarching world of terrorism, and not a cyber terrorism. I'm talking about back in the days what happened with the World Trade Center, and why I try to put this slide up here. Right after that thing happened, obviously the things change upside down with the US and geopolitical situation. To rebuild the World Trade Center, the first thing they thought about, okay, we can go back to the same contemporary cement, long buildings, be the tallest of tall, make a statement. But it has to be something different in the world of digitization. And this is where what we talk about, it's called embedded intelligence, that was incorporated in a first commercial building in the US territory, where you will see some of the buzzwords that's happening. After 2012, we call it IoT, location of everything, medical of everything, OT, right? That's why I'm here. But part of me wants you to go back those 200 years history. We cannot stop this evolution. Either we with it or we got to do something about it. But now I think what we heard from many of our speakers from the ransomware and the threat intelligence and the data compromisations and the privacy issues, we as an industry, we could absolutely change those in a proactive way. But there are things that happens in a way, like, so if you look at this trajectory where the data digitization is going, it's endless. Everybody or everyone gonna invent some things along the way which will change the industry for the next 20, 25 years or 40 years. And this is where I want to go back to. It's not a marketing slide, but just to give you an overarching understanding of the traditional endpoint security challenges. And if you go back to the same trajectory, we had laptops, we had work computers, going back into the COVID-19 and COVID-20 to COVID times, everybody went back to work, have many of the devices connected from home network or a hotel network. So if you look at the trajectory, we are moving away from the managed device to the unmanaged device. Many of my laptop or many of my, let's say, cell phone devices, I cannot protect if I don't have an inbuilt engine running. And I cannot run an inbuilt engine on many of those real-time operating systems. And I'm going to come back to the real-time operating systems, what it means in terms of ICS and critical infrastructure and protecting our critical infrastructure. So many of the devices that I've listed here, going from the down bottom side, web, PC, servers, laptop, tablets, smartphones, everybody is well aware of it. But if you go back up a little bit on the unmanaged device, now any of those I've listed on number 5, down below on the yellow trajectory, you can easily install an agent. I can run antivirus agent, I can run a NAC device, I can try and protect something. But if you look at the trajectory of the digital transformation, many of those devices will have a very hard time running a resource, and this is why it is called an IoT. So you have to go back to the basics. What is an IoT? It's an Internet of everything. It doesn't have a full-fledged Microsoft or Linux operating systems where you have many resources available to you to run things like antivirus software or do some intelligence things. And this is why real-time operating systems that goes back into our factories, smart lighting, smart heating, ventilation, air conditions, Bluetooth devices, security cameras, you name it, point-of-sale systems, medical devices. How many of you have gone to a hospital, have a medical IoT device, connected it, but you wouldn't know otherwise if that device is vulnerable or not? I don't want to put my life to the device where it is vulnerable. This is what we're talking about, the traditional endpoint security challenges. Is up to 90% of the device will be agentless, meaning there is no agent that I can run and I can perform some actions and get the intelligence out of it, whether it be data contextual, whether it be running some sort of threat analysis. If I don't have a way to run an agent, what are the ways that we need to aware of this unmanaged availability of the portion in the enterprise network or in the manufacturing network or in the oil and gas or power utility or nuclear power plant? And this is where I go into and give, the next slide is more sort of a not give you the same story, but this is exactly my previous predecessors and many of other previous speakers talked about the ever compounding cyber attack surface and impacts. Now, think about it, if the explosion of the device is going to go 10-fold, 20-fold, 50-folds, where do you think this thing's going to land into? Same thing to the comparison of the slides. If the cryptocurrency is going up and the cyber ransom attack is going up, this is exactly what it talks to the same thing. The compounding effect of a day-to-day attacks not only going to transform the way it is working, but if you look at the vulnerabilities that are found in real-time operating systems, I'm not listing Linux or iOS and those sort of library. So if people doesn't understand real-time operating systems, there are critical infrastructure that runs on real-time operating system, program logic controllers, Anybody know PLC? I'm sure many of you know PLC. Okay. And the name states programmable logic controller. There is something to do a program. What happens when I have an ability to do a program? Does it come with the territory that I make a mistake? Somebody can find my mistakes, but that's the state of the system. It is a programmable logic control. You cannot change. It has to do something about programming to change the state of the ICS device or shut off the motor or turn the valves. This is what it's called program, and this is why it's called control. And given those, and now that combining with real-time operating systems and all those IoT-related surface attacks, it's going to quadruple in a way that we haven't thought about. And this is why it is true material impacts to the perfect storms. Now, why do I talk about the ever-compounding cyber attack surface and the impeding effect to the social lives? So if we talk about industrial control systems or OT device, or when I say OT, it's people gets this term differently, but an industrial term is an operational technology. Has nothing to do with cyber, nothing to do with computers. It's all about industrial production. So if you go back to those 200 years of history, what have we learned out of those 200 years? What we are doing is we are doing an industrial production. Electricity is an industrial production. Power is an industrial production. Similarly, part of this industrial production, when something happens, and now combining with the real-time operating systems vulnerability, just in the last 2 year or year and a half, if you look at the bottom slide of the page, 100 million IoT and OT devices are impacted. Now think about it, just from a singular 9 DNS vulnerability that found on an open source, 100 million devices. 33 vulnerability discovered impacted 1 million IoT device in a single span. So the attack area of the surface attack is extremely large. People can easily find many of those vulnerabilities with means and motives. There are, again, with lots of nation state and threat agents that are incorporating and evolving. My previous predecessor, I think Jordan, made one thing very clear. Do I really care if my data is compromised? Do I? I'll tell you why the difference, what it means by that. Let's say we are sitting in this room and there is a fire. Would you care that fire is there and your life is at stake? Absolutely, and that's called availability. That's what he was referencing. So from a digital transformation standpoint, if I am a gray area hacker, I don't care if I'm compromising the data, but if I can compromise the availability, I'm already putting you at risk. And that's what this ICS device does. These are the industrial production systems. Ultimately, part of it is there are 3 basic things when you protect the ICS and OT or critical infrastructure protection. There are 3 risk factors. People ask me in many various forms, oh, but these devices are air-gapped. Oh, these devices have no internet connectivity. Oh, these devices are way down to the bottom of the Purdue model that nobody can even understand. No, they do. Now, when they do, that's when you see what happened with the Colonial Pipeline. I think somebody did talk about solar winds. I can go back to the similar situation on the history of the cyber impacts on industrial control systems. A couple of years ago, we had a massive power outage in the East Coast. The entire East Coast grid was down. Go back to the Russia and Ukraine during those digital warfare. Ukraine power grids were keep going down before they had to let go of Crimea. These are the things that happens as part of this industrial control systems, OT cybersecurity, where me as an individual citizen or you as an individual citizen doesn't matter, but it matters when I don't have a power at my house, or I cannot walk on a street if there is no power on the street lights. And these are the thing called what we call critical infrastructure. Now, why it matters? Many times people ask me, okay, why it matters to me if I don't have a light on the road? Yes, it matters because then, if not, there are 3 critical risk factors that goes in hand. And I'm going to talk to this slide, but I want to talk through the 3 risk data point. What happens if I don't have ICS device or industrial control devices or a particular industrial production that I'm running? First and foremost thing, it's a life safety issue. Like I said, if you are working in a factory and a manufacturing plant, and if you have a deadly chemical processing in that plant, and if I cannot monitor, control the flow of that chemical, and if it has a spill on a floor, what do you think is going to happen to the worker that is working on that area? It's a life safety issue. Would my company would care to the revenue of my factory, or would it care? Or would it care? Thank you. Or would it care if my employee's life safety is at stake? So that's the first risk scenario. Second, environmental impact. Now, life safety goes in hand with an environmental impact. When I say environmental impact, because similar situation, if the chemical spill that goes to the public property of the surrounding physical property of that factory, do you really think it's an operational nightmare or the PR nightmare for a company? Because now not only you're putting a jeopardy of your employee, but the surrounding community that your factory or your physical infrastructure is existing. Third and last, which, yes, everybody cares, economics of the factory output, only if I can attain the first two. If I cannot attain the life safety, if I cannot attain the environmental impact, factory output is the third risk priority that I can talk to. Now, why I have these slides up? Many of us talk about IT and operational technology, but it's an entirely different industry. These are some of those devices that you can't run an agent on, let alone you can't even probe this, because these are extremely deterministic devices that it needs to do what it was supposed to be doing, was invented for the industrial purposes. When it needs to run a chiller plant, it must run a chiller plant, because if that plant doesn't run, you have a direct outages on your data center that you're operating your cloud infrastructure. But back in the day, in the back end, ICS devices are the one what is running those data center, keeping the chiller plant running. And this is why it's an uptime or the availability that matters the most in an industrial production. Many of these devices were, if you go back to the history of 200 years, many of this component life cycle is anywhere between 15 years to 20 to 25 years. So if I spent a $1 million on a particular industrial asset, do you really think I care how much vulnerable it is? Or do I care to run a $1 million device in a factory? What is my first top priority? Yes, from a CISO standpoint, the priority is to protect these systems. But as an overall vision, I need to understand what I'm running on my environment. There are lots of isolation, remote and physical access, many of the proprietary operating systems, because if you think about, well before this computer invented, we had mechanical convergence, we have automation convergence, and this is how the whole industry was relying on. So when people talk about, let's implement a cloud technology on ICS on a nuclear power plant, do you really think it's feasible? It's not, I can tell you right now. Unless if I have $100 billion to invest on a green nuclear power plant from the ground up, which never going to happen. Anyways, the point is, there are convergence going to happen between IT and OT, and IT does not equate to OT. You cannot bring the same firewall and protect the OT devices, because that firewall does not understand the common industrial protocols. So the defense in depth is very critical. Physical infrastructure, physical security also very critical. And I'm right closing on my time. So what are the challenges with the new endpoints? I think I talked about this. Many of the enterprise in terms of compromised tablet, compromised smart TV, compromised security camera, botnet. If you go into the setting of, we are transitioning back into the office, and now part of the transitioning, what we are also calling is smart technology movement or smart buildings. You walk in, you park your car, you already know which parking lot or park, you're going to get to park. If you go back to, let's say, medical and clinical devices, many of those devices are vulnerable. In a nutshell, I think all these devices that we talk about are here to stay. It's not going away just because it's vulnerable. Those devices were invented to do some task, not in the concert to the security or threat or intelligence. They are designed to do something. This is why, and if you look at it, I have an IoT sensor. It is designed to connect. It has nothing to do with security. But now we are looking overarchingly security. Then there are resource constraints that I've already talked about. If I am putting an IoT sensor somewhere here to do the people monitor or people movement, it's just going to count the people, how many motion sensors it's detecting. It has nothing to do with privacy data or, if I have a mother room, I can't put a monitor sensor. So there are things that you have to understand. These are resource constraints. It is extremely deterministic. You cannot run an agent on these devices. You cannot run, and there are multiple manufacturers, right? Billions of devices. This is why going back to the vulnerability that we talked about, the compromise of this, the area of self-attack is greater challenge.